Has the Bitcoin bubble finally burst? Hello and welcome to today's Daily Blitz. In this video, we're going to go through some of the recent price action in Bitcoin, and we're also going to answer that age-old question, is Bitcoin a bubble? As you can see from the chart, Bitcoin has a habit of bouncing around on support levels. But if it does break down, what follows is basically a crash. And as you can see from the more recent chart, that's exactly what's happened in the last few weeks. Now, Boaz, you have an explanation for what's going on.
Well, we all do what we can to try and explain market movements. Personally, I think the reason for Bitcoin's recent fall in value, which has been very steep, Bitcoin always moves quite sharply in one direction or another. It's very rare for Bitcoin really to just move sideways and not do very much. So it has to move. But I think the reason for the recent collapse in value is really a product of the underlying network. So the underlying amount of value that is being transferred using Bitcoin across the blockchain, effectively. So if you liken it to a car, it's pretty much the speed of the car is determined by how fast the engine is running, and the engine of Bitcoin right now is not running fast enough to maintain its momentum. And that, I think, is the underlying reason for the crash. However, all across the crypto space, everybody has their own narrative as to why it might be. You know, they're all this fear of, say, Chinese government intervention and the like. But I think ultimately it's a much more fundamental issue that's driven the recent decline.
You mentioned fundamental, and that's what makes your opinion or your hypothesis more interesting. It's the idea that Bitcoin actually does have some sort of intrinsic value. That is, it is valuable for a certain reason. And if you can look into that reason, you can work out what the price should be.
Yeah, so if you take a look at this chart, which compares Bitcoin to other speculative assets of the past, including so stocks in 1929, including the South Sea bubble, the Mississippi bubble, and the like, you'll see that all of those, following their peak, they collapse pretty quickly. In terms of the time after their peak, they all go quite sharply down afterwards. Bitcoin seems to be quite unique in this regard, if it is in fact a bubble. As Bitcoin has recovered from its trough earlier in the year, it really does make quite a good case that Bitcoin is not really a bubble after all, or if it is actually part of a much larger bubble that is yet to occur, I would say. Because obviously it does not exhibit the same traits that all these previous bubbles did.
And instead it exhibits very different traits that our colleague Charlie Morris is looking into in trying to come up with a price and a value for Bitcoin.
Yeah, and in developing a fair value for Bitcoin requires taking into account all of the transactions that have been going on in the past several weeks, and then effectively dividing them by the total amount of market cap, so the total dollar value of the blockchain network. And he's come up with some very interesting averages that have been created by blockchain over time, and distilling those averages into simply one number, which one can use to see whether or not Bitcoin is overvalued or undervalued. Now, we'll leave a link in the description below to some of Charlie's work in the past. However, just to tie up today's video, in terms of the fair value of Bitcoin using that metric, we're not far off it, but we would still be overvalued.
Right, so if you'd like to find out more about Charlie's way of measuring Bitcoin and valuing Bitcoin, please click on the link in the description below. Thanks for watching today's Daily Blitz, and don't forget to tune in tomorrow.